Welcome to the Sense Check Lab, where we cut through the noise and myths, one evidence-based deep dive at a time. And today, we're unraveling the truth about instant noodles. Tasty, cheap, everywhere. But are they actually dangerous for our health? It's really kind of amazing how instant noodles have just exploded globally, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, you find them everywhere. Quick dorm room meal, office lunch staple. They're just sort of baked into modern life now.
They really are.
Super convenient, obviously, very fast, and let's be honest, pretty satisfying.
Definitely hits the spot sometimes.
But yeah, beyond that simple convenience, what's actually going on when we, rip open that packet?
Well, it's a perfect storm, really. A prime example of this huge global shift towards, well, convenience foods.
Right.
It's driven by so many things happening at once, like rapid urbanization, huge changes in how we live and work.
Less time for cooking, basically.
Exactly. And also simple economics, rising purchasing power in many parts of the world. You mentioned India earlier. Their market for convenience foods is just booming, growing like 20% compounded annually.
Wow, 20%.
Yeah, huge demand for instant, ready-to-cook stuff, especially in the big cities. And for busy people, working folks, that convenience factor isn't just nice, it's almost essential, Time is just so scarce.
That's such a key point. Time is the currency for so many of us. But that convenience, it often feels like there's a catch, doesn't it?
There often is.
And that's what we want to dig into. So let's pull back the curtain, or the lid, I guess. When you look inside that packet of instant noodles, what are we actually finding? What are they really made of?
Okay, so this is where we get into the nitty-gritty. Instant noodles fit very neatly into this category we call ultra-processed foods. UPFs, for short.
UPFs, right. I've been hearing that term a lot more lately.
You probably have, and it's important to understand what it means. Think about food that's gone through some serious industrial transformation. We're not just talking simple cooking or preserving here. These are mass-produced items, designed for maximum convenience, and they undergo multiple, often complex, physical, biological, or chemical processes.
So it's way beyond just drying pasta.
Yeah,
significant engineering involved.
Precisely. And often, they're made mostly or even entirely from substances you wouldn't typically, pull out of your cupboard at home.
Like what?
Things like hydrogenated oils. Those are fats chemically changed for a longer shelf life. Modified starches, carbs, processed for a specific texture. Protein isolates proteins, basically stripped out and concentrated. These aren't chosen for nutrition usually. They're chosen because they're cheap, they're stable, and you can engineer them to give a very specific taste or mouthfeel. And then on top of that base, you usually get this long list of additives.
Ah, yes, the ingredients list that looks like a science experiment.
Kind of, yeah. You've got flavoring agents, colors to make it look appealing, emulsifiers to hold things together that wouldn't normally mix, humectants to keep moisture right, non-sugar sweeteners sometimes. And these are often added not just to make it taste or look good, but sometimes, frankly, to mask less desirable flavors or textures that come from all that processing.
It really does sound less like traditional food and more like a carefully constructed product aimed right at our taste buds and our need for speed.
That's a fair description in many cases.
Okay, so given that, convenience is great, we need it, but we absolutely have to ask, what does the science actually tell us about the health side of eating so many of these UPFs, including instant noodles?
Yeah, and this is where the research is becoming quite alarming, actually. The sheer amount of UPFs we're eating is staggering. In the U.S., for example, it's estimated that more than half of the average person's daily calories come from these ultra-processed foods.
More than half. Wow.
It's huge. And we're seeing strong, consistent links between high UPF consumption and rising rates of really serious chronic diseases. Obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, even things like dementia and depression are being linked in studies. It's not just one food, it's the whole dietary pattern.
That is sobering. Over half our calories. Okay, let's break it down then. What are some of the specific components in UPFs, and noodles specifically, that raise red flags? Let's start with sodium. That's usually a big one.
Sodium is definitely a major player. UPFs, pretty much across the board, tend to be very high in sodium. It's used for flavor, obviously, but also as a preservative.
Right.
And there's specific research, like a study by Ha and colleagues back in 2017, that looked directly at instant noodles, sweets, and sugary drinks. They found that frequent consumers had higher levels of triglycerides, that's fat in the blood, and also higher blood glucose levels.
Okay, so direct links there.
Yes. And zooming out to get to the broader UPF category, high intake is very strongly linked to hypertension, high blood pressure, which, as we know, is a massive risk factor for heart attacks and strokes.
So high sodium, clear check mark on that concern. But beyond the salt, what else is potentially problematic in these packets? You mentioned the processing itself earlier. What about the fats? And does the actual manufacturing create new issues?
That's a really crucial question. So, yes, UPFs often contain unhealthy types of fats, high levels of total fat, saturated fat. That's one concern. But you hit on something really important. The processing, especially the high heat treatments used, can create what scientists call neoformed contaminants.
Neoformed contaminants. Okay, that sounds technical and slightly worrying. What are those exactly?
Yeah, it does sound a bit sci-fi. Think of them as unwanted chemical byproducts. When you heat certain food components together, like sugars and amino acids reacting during the Maillard reaction, which gives us that nice brown color and flavor.
Right, like on toast or grilled meat.
Exactly. But that same reaction under industrial conditions can also form some nasty compounds, things like acrylamide, heterocyclic amines, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. These are found in many heat-treated processed foods. And take acrylamide, for instance. The European Food Safety Agency considers the evidence strong enough to classify it as genotoxic.
Genotoxic. What does that mean for us? Like our genes?
It means it has the potential to damage our DNA, our genetic material. And over time, that kind of damage is understood to be a contributing factor in the development of cancer.
Wow.
In fact, one meta-analysis that's a study combining results from multiple studies found a modest link between the acrylamide we get from our diet and a higher risk of kidney and endometrial cancer, specifically in non-smokers. So it's not just about what ingredients start in the food, but what chemicals are created during manufacturing.
That's a really unsettling thought. Okay, and what about all those other things on the label? That E numbers, the preservatives, the stabilizers, the stuff that sounds like it belongs more in a lab.
The additives. Yeah, it's a really complex picture. In Europe and the U.S. alone, there are over 250 different food additives authorized for use.
250.
Yep. And while each one is supposedly tested for safety individually, the big question mark is about the health effects of consuming them all together, cumulatively, day after day, and how they might interact. Some scientists call this the cocktail effect.
Cocktail effect, like mixing drinks, but inside our bodies.
Yeah.
With chemicals.
That's basically the idea. Imagine you're constantly taking in dozens of these different chemicals. We might have some data on what one does at a certain dose, but we really don't have much long-term human data on how they all interact, potentially amplifying each other's effects. It's a huge blind spot, really. And there are specific additives that raise concerns based on current research. Take sodium nitrite, for example.
Okay.
It's common in processed meats. When you char or heavily cook those meats, nitrite can form nitrosamines, which are considered carcinogenic. They've been potentially linked to colorectal cancer.
Right. I've heard about nitrates in bacon and things.
Exactly. Then there's titanium dioxide, TiO2. It's a whitening agent used in loads of things. Sweets, sauces, dressing.
Titanium dioxide, like the metal.
Well, it's a compound, often containing incredibly tiny nanoscale particles. And experimental studies, mostly in animals so far, suggest it might initiate or promote early precancerous changes in colon cells and also potentially cause chronic gut inflammation. The WHO and the International Agency for Research on Cancer classified TiO2 as possibly carcinogenic to humans, Group 2B.
Possibly carcinogenic. Okay. What else?
Well, there are artificial sweeteners like aspartame. The science on them is still quite controversial, honestly. There are ongoing debates about their effects on our metabolism or gut bacteria, and some long-term studies have raised questions about potential carcinogenicity, though it's far from settled.
Yeah.
And one more big one, not an additive, but a contaminant, bisphenol A, or BPA.
From plastics, right?
Exactly. It's suspected to leach from the plastic packaging of many UPFs into the food, and BPA is a known endocrine disruptor.
Endocrine disruptor. What does that actually do to us?
It means it can mess with your body's hormone system. And hormones regulate almost everything: growth, metabolism, mood, reproduction, you name it. There's growing evidence linking BPA exposure to various non-communicable diseases, including some cancers that are sensitive to hormone disruption, like certain breast or prostate cancers. So it's a really wide range of concerns, much broader than just, empty calories.
That is a lot. It really paints a picture of modern food potentially being this complex chemical mix. And for many ingredients, especially combined, the long-term effects are still pretty murky.
That's a fair summary.
So, given all that, it perhaps isn't shocking then that solid scientific evidence is increasingly connecting high UPF intake, and by extension foods like instant noodles, to serious diseases, including cancer. What are some of the big studies telling us about those direct links?
Yeah, the evidence from large, well-conducted studies is becoming quite consistent and, frankly, concerning. Several major cohort studies these follow large groups of people over many years have found similar results. For example, a big French study published in a BMJ in 2018, looking at over 100,000 people, found that just a 10% increase in the proportion of UPFs in someone's diet was associated with a 12% increase in overall cancer risk and an 11% increase in breast cancer risk specifically.
Just a 10% increase in UPFs led to that much higher risk.
That's what they found. And what was really interesting is that these links remain significant even after the researchers adjusted for the overall nutritional quality of the diet, things like fat, sugar, salt intake.
So it wasn't just that UPFs are unhealthy nutritionally, it was something else about them.
It strongly suggests that yes, something inherent in the ultraprocessing itself, or the additives or the contaminants we talked about, seems to be playing a role beyond just the basic nutrient profile. And this isn't an isolated finding. A large UK biobank study published in the Clinical Medicine in 2023 found similar results. Every 10 percentage point increase in UPF consumption was linked to higher overall cancer incidence, specifically ovarian cancer too, and also a higher risk of dying from overall cancer, ovarian cancer, and breast cancer. Then, a meta-analysis in clinical nutrition, also from 2023, pulled together data from 11 studies. It confirmed that a 10% rise in UPF intake was linked to increased overall and breast cancer risk. It also suggested links between high intake and increased risk of colorectal and pancreatic cancer. Smaller associations were seen for certain leukemias and brain tumors too.
Okay, so the overall picture is pretty consistent.
Very consistent. Another angle, a European study in The Lancet in 2023 showed the flip side. They found that replacing just 10% of processed foods in the diet with minimally processed foods was associated with a reduced risk of overall cancer, and specifically several types like head and neck, esophageal, colon, rectal, liver, and postmenopausal breast cancer.
So making even relatively small swaps can make a difference.
The data suggests it can, yes.
That's encouraging. Now, you mentioned colorectal cancer specifically in one of those meta-analyses. Is there more research focusing just on gut cancers?
Yes, there definitely is. Colorectal cancer is one area where the link with UPFs is getting quite a bit of attention. A study in the journal Gut from late 2024 had a really interesting finding. They looked at colon tumors for people with different diets. And they found that tumors from people with poor diets, which usually means high in UPFs, had higher levels of biochemicals that promote inflammation and lower levels of substances associated with healing.
Huh.
The experts involved suggested that if your body is constantly fueled by UPFs, its ability to heal damage, like the kind that might initiate cancer, is reduced because of chronic inflammation and maybe a suppressed immune system, which could allow cancer to get a foothold and grow.
So it's like weakening the body's own defense and repair mechanisms.
Well, that seems to be the thinking, yeah. Another important study, this one of the BMJ from 2022 using U.S. data, found that men who ate the most UPFs, the top fifth, had a 29% higher risk of developing colorectal cancer compared to those who ate the least.
29% higher risk for men. What about women?
Interestingly, in that specific study, they didn't observe the same strong association in women. The reasons aren't entirely clear. It could be differences in the types of UPFs consumed, hormonal factors, or other lifestyle differences not fully accounted for. But the link in men was quite strong, especially for cancer in the distal colon, the latter part.
Okay.
And digging even earlier in the process, research in the Journal of the National Cancer Institute in 2023 found that higher UPF consumption was linked to an increased risk of developing colorectal cancer precursors, things like adenomas and polyps, the growth that can eventually turn cancerous.
So UPFs might be involved very early on in the pathway to cancer.
Exactly, which suggests that reducing UPF intake could be a strategy for primary prevention, stopping it before it even starts.
And what about breast cancer? You mentioned it in the overall findings, but any more specifics?
Right, so we recapped the Filet study, finding that 11% increased risk. Another meta-analysis by Leon and colleagues, published in 2023, also generally concluded that higher UPF consumption was associated with higher odds of breast cancer overall. Interestingly, that meta-analysis didn't find statistically significant differences based on menopausal status when pooling all the studies together. However, they did note that one specific study included did find a significant link between UPFs and estrogen receptor positive ER+ breast cancer, which is a very common subtype that's fueled by estrogen.
And quickly, before we move off cancer, you mentioned fructose earlier. That's sugar that's in a lot of processed foods.
Yes, there was a recent animal study published in Nature in late 2024. It's early days, still in mice, but it suggested that giving mice extra fructose led to higher levels of certain fats in their blood called lysophosphatidylcholines.
Okay.
And these particular fats seem to enhance tumor growth in models of melanoma, breast cancer, and cervical in those animals. So it's another potential mechanism how specific components abundant in UPFs, like fructose, might actually fuel cancer progression. Still needs more research in humans, of course.
Okay, so this is a really broad and concerning range of evidence linking UPFs generally to increased health risks, including various cancers. Let's circle back now directly to the instant noodles we started with. How does all this general UPF information apply specifically to them?
Well, we do have some research that helps connect those dots. A
Yeah.
study looked specifically at convenience food consumption, including instant noodles, among working women in India.
And what did it find?
It found that the working women consumed ready-to-cook foods, and the study explicitly mentions Maggi, noodles, as examples much more frequently than non-working women. About a quarter of them ate these weekly,
Okay.
and the impact on their overall diet was pretty significant. These convenience foods made up almost 30% of the total daily energy intake for the working women, compared to just under 14% for the non-working women. Their average daily intake by weight was 3 times higher.
3 times higher, wow. So they were relying on them quite heavily.
It seems so. And here's the key finding. The study found significant correlations between the intake of all types of convenience foods, including those ready-to-cook noodles, and higher levels of total cholesterol and triglycerides.
Ah, triglycerides again.
Exactly. And that links back perfectly to the Ha et al. Study from 2017 we mentioned earlier, the one that specifically found higher triglycerides and blood glucose in frequent instant noodle consumers. So while instant noodles are just one example of a UPF, they clearly pack in many of the characteristics: the high sodium, the processed carbs, the fats, the additives that contribute to these broader documented health risks. They're like a convenient little package for many of the concerns we've discussed.
Right, that really brings it home. Okay, so this leads us to the crucial question for everyone listening. Faced with all this quite sobering information, what can we actually do? How do we find that balance between the very real need for convenience and taking care of our health? Especially with something like instant noodles that are just so there. Are we saying banish them forever?
No, definitely not about banishing them forever. That's rarely realistic or necessary for most people. But the science is pretty clear. Making conscious choices to replace processed and especially ultra-processed foods with more minimally processed options can make a real difference in reducing risks for various cancers and other chronic diseases.
So awareness is step one.
Awareness is absolutely step one. Really understanding what's in the convenience foods you eat, looking at those labels, and being mindful of their potential health effects, like that study on working women highlighted.
Okay.
Then, beyond our individual plates, there's definitely a role for broader public health policies to maybe help limit UPF consumption and promote healthier options, making the healthy choice the easier choice. But for us as individuals,
Yeah, what can we do day to day?
I think a good mindset is respect, not routine.
Respect, not routine. I like that.
Yeah. Think of instant noodles and maybe many other UPFs, not as an everyday staple, but as an occasional thing. They're not going to cause a disaster if you eat them once in a while. But the accumulated evidence strongly suggests they shouldn't be a regular part of your diet if you're aiming for long-term health. Even small shifts, swapping out just a couple of UPF-heavy meals each week for something simpler, more whole food-based, can potentially lower your health risks significantly over time. It's really about that cumulative burden.
Respect, not routine. That feels like a really powerful and, importantly, actionable takeaway. And it's crucial to remember, isn't it, that everything we've talked about today isn't just opinion or guesswork. It's grounded in quite a bit of solid scientific research.
Absolutely. Our discussion today pulled from large-scale perspective cohort studies, systematic reviews, meta-analyses, all published in well-respected, peer-reviewed academic journals. The big names like the BMJ, the Lancet, Clinical Nutrition, Gut, the Journal of the National Cancer Institute. These are serious studies looking at large populations over a long period. And we really encourage listeners, if you want to dig deeper, please do check out the show notes. We'll have a full list of the references and links to the studies and official sources we talked about so you can explore the evidence for yourself.
Thanks for joining us on the Sense Check Lab. If you found this deep dive useful, please share it with a friend, hit subscribe, and leave us a review.